What is going on, Metaverse? Really excited today to be joined by a very special guest. The Santiago is joining us today on Annie Knows. And we've been talking a lot, Santi. There's been probably more activity in the past month and a half in crypto than there have been in a long time. Most of it has, I think, come out with a lot of negative impacts on the community and the space. But there are some good
Mm.
things that are building too. So I want to just check in with you first as we're getting going here. How are you doing overall? What's your opinion on the events of the last few months?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me again. And it's always a pleasure to have a good discussion with you. And I know you're super plugged into a lot of the projects I'm a part of and thematically a good thinker in the space. So, anyways, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think I've been through multiple cycles in crypto. And yeah, actually, yesterday, I went back and looked at like really old emails, conversations, 2014, 2012, 2017, 2018 to kind of really understand what I was thinking, what other people were saying, kind of get a sense of the vibe. And because I think we're in that moment where a lot of people are really negative and turn increasingly so for right reason. Look, I think this is probably one of the worst, or if not the worst, I've seen in terms of like disappointment in human behavior. Um, but in many ways, I feel very optimistic because I think increasingly, unfortunately, but increasingly, I think people understand the need for decentralization, for open transparency, um, and really that's why we're here. And so, and also importantly, I think mainstream media is increasingly understanding that and making the distinction between what is FTX, um, what is 3 hours, and what is, you know, um, open decentralized finance, which has been working in many ways as intended. And so that's really positive. And it's just a reminder because in times like these, I think a lot of people lose sight of and miss kind of the incredible work that continues to be done uh, by teams. And I know we're here to talk a little bit about, as always, Illuvium, and they've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years. They continue to ship, and I always like to talk to teams about how the morale is, and you think a lot of builders just continue to build in any market environment. And of course, sometimes it can be stressful because some teams are not as well capitalized as others, and sometimes look back and wish they could have raised a little bit more when times were good. And certainly the capital markets have tightened up substantially. Some teams might not even make it. Some teams are already folding, and other teams that didn't have true passion to build go away. And that's true of crypto as it is of any other asset class. And so, anyways, but overall, I'm feeling great. I think thankfully, largely unaffected by a lot of the stuff that's going on. But it is an important reminder of why we're here, why this all matters. Unfortunately, it has sometimes to be this way, but nonetheless, we'll carry on.
hmm Yeah, I think that that point of carrying on is exactly the right message that I want people to hear is in this space. And I talked to a lot of founders just in the last week. I've talked to I think three different studios, and the sentiment is that a lot of these projects that may not be well enough capitalized, that have raised maybe they raised smaller amounts in the past year or so, their runways in jeopardy. They may not be able to make it through, which is going to be disappointing. But one of the flip kind of sides of the coin here is the projects that are actually building. In many cases, you don't see the content of what's being developed until well after the fact. It's easy to point to the rugs and the scams and the teams that stop and things that just fall by the wayside because that happens a lot quicker. Waiting 2 years, 3 years in Web3 feels like an eternity to a lot of us, and so it takes a lot longer to see the fruits of the actual teams that are building mature. But I do see a lot of these projects that just continue. They're putting out good content, alpha versions, beta versions. Illuvium's one of them. But again, we've got a lot of mutual friends in the space that just continue on, and I think they have the right mentality. So for those that are following a number of projects, this is why it's important, I think, to be diversified, not just from an investing standpoint, but with your time and attention, because there's going to be a lot of things that go sideways, but a lot of projects are going to make it and to ship good, and we'll be able to stick around for this as long as
Mhm.
you have the right conviction for the space.
Anytime I turn like overly negative, I go back and talk to a lot of the founders and spend more time with them.
Mm,
And it really just gives me, to your point, much more perspective on what's going on under the hood, and gives me a lot of confidence in that we're actually shipping what I think will be products that we haven't ever seen before in crypto. Really, really like useful applications. I mean, arguably you've already had them with DeFi, but it's a little bit different. Like, that's kind of like still core infrastructure. Front facing applications is what I'm thinking about that are just beautiful, really good, like just very at feature parity with Web 2. And, games, people love to play games. We've talked about in prior episodes about like why gaming is so important. And I think it's because it takes us mainstream, and, it's entertainment, and crypto continues to be an asset class that for none other, if anything, if nothing else, it provides a lot of entertainment value, whether it's memes, whether it's collecting, whether it's gaming. And yeah, there's a lot of gamification. There might be some projects that are more on purely just, like type of casino versus others that, are games and are fun and are perhaps more sustainable. But like in that spectrum, there's a lot of entertainment value that is being created here. And, I think like a lot of people sometimes question like why is crypto supposed to exist, and why are we all doing this? And like sometimes maybe we're the community too afraid to acknowledge that there is a lot of value in entertainment,
mm,
and that's okay. And it's okay that people like to speculate. People like to speculate in the World Cup, as I like to speculate in daily interactions. Like, it is just the human condition, and as long as we are like honest with ourselves and recognize that that's a big part of not just crypto, but just like life in general, and that there can be a lot of value, and that's okay, created out of that, then I think it'll just like allow us to like break free from a lot of the stigma, a lot of the self-imposed like I don't know, like limitations, and just break free from that thinking. Just say, all right, we're here to provide a lot of entertainment. There's also a lot of really powerful things under the hood. And let's not forget about that. And let's always like strive towards decentralization and power to the consumer. And like all of that is like core principles. But I think sometimes we're a little bit, you know, too pie in the sky and just forget that like it's okay to like deliver entertainment value in the same way that Netflix and some other companies that are built tremendous amount of value are doing it. And let's just start there.
mm. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. As humans, we often try to find ways to escape when things are not going well, right? And over history, there's been different time periods where it's been easier and harder to do that. But especially you look at going into what appears to be pretty much a global recession that's going to impact a lot of people negatively. Sometimes, as you're really struggling and grinding through that with your family or your friends, you need places to go where you can have a community that's supportive of you, get back on your feet, and also in to some degrees just kind of take your mind away from those challenges. And for a lot of us, that's gaming, right? 3 billion of us on the planet. Use that for some form of community and escape and entertainment, and I think that's a good thing, right? There's limits. Anything in overindulgence is a problem, but as long as there's an appropriate level of moderation, for how much you're playing, uh, games are absolutely a positive for humanity. And I think this space really pushes the envelope to make it more accessible and with a stronger degree of ownership and decentralization than we've ever seen before. And so I can't say enough how pleased I am to see a lot of these projects that are really trying to find good ways to leverage the tech to build things that we haven't been able to in the past. It's not just let me slap on an NFT. You play the same game you have for forever, but like you can now trade it on an auction house. Like that's okay. That's still in my mind a better solution usually than the Web 2 equivalent. But there's a lot of really unique takes that these projects are building.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And look, the reality is, pound for pound, if you're playing a game, um, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to play it because it's fun. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that the real crop of true games in crypto. We're talking about like Nor, Illuvium, and they'll increasingly become better. But the betas are promising enough to like at least understand that there is a path towards creating really powerful games and
Mhm.
studios that can deliver on that. That are just fun to play and can acquire users because they're just like really fun for nothing else. And then if it's incrementally, it allows you to, as you said, be having and appreciating true ownership of the assets and the, that are being created. And then gives you so many other benefits. Then, pound for pound, like, of course you're going to play a game that has these Web3 elements. Um, but we've heard certain of the best founders, I think, like Kieran and Brooke say, we're not building because we don't assume that a user is immediately going to be captivated by Web3. We're just going to build a really good game.
Mhm.
And once they're there, it's like the Trojan horse strategy. Once they're there, then they'll start appreciating all the kind of the cool
Mm.
elements of like, oh, look, wow, like I can trade these skins and all this stuff. And the community is really powerful and all this stuff. And so I think in many ways like that I think is the right mindset. And just to compare it in prior cycles, it was very pie in the sky. It was very, you know, disparate thinking in terms of, wow, we have this like core smart contracting consensus engine. We can do so many things with this. And like, it was sort of like a explosion, open Pandora's box and say, wow, we can do everything. And it turns out that, there were a lot of dependencies in terms of infrastructure that needed to be built. DeFi couldn't have worked without a stable
Mhm.
coin kind of unit of account. Maker allowed that and really opened up the possibility for DeFi. And so in many ways, and I've I made this mistake where I got really excited about certain use cases and then looked back and said, wow, we need to build so many other
Mm.
things before this could actually work. And I'm talking about dependencies. And so in many ways, gaming, for instance, requires a very high throughput, cheap environment. Oh, lo and behold, we have L2s.
Mhm. Yes.
And I think a lot of those kind of stars are aligning in a very interesting way. Macro side, bear market, all of that aside, like if you just objectively look of the setup here, you have Ethereum this year successfully transitioning to proof of stake, which required like an it's just like I can't underscore how important that is because for the first time in the history, I think you could argue that like Bitcoin upgrading and like the forks were like contentious, but like I think this particularly is the first time that you've had a sufficiently large and decentralized system agree and upgrade successfully. And like that's super powerful. Like if you're a political
Mhm.
scientist, you might say, okay, like like look at Singapore, small nation states really work, but once you try to expand them, like they can
Mhm.
fragment and it's really hard to coordinate. And look at the US, it's like increasingly fragmented. But like you have Ethereum successfully transitioning to proof of stake. That's a really big deal and really kind of allows you to then say, wow, there's something here that is super powerful to attract developers and attract people to come and as a settlement layer is fascinating to observe and I think is one of the biggest like success that this industry has had. And then second, you have L2s increasingly like, working. And so that setup is super important for mainstream adoption, coinciding with like real use cases and like nice applications being built and will hit market in the next 12 to 18, 24 months. Um, and I think, I'm not a macro. It's impossible to time these things, but I will. It's hard for me to imagine a world where really cool games ship and people kind of don't notice. In the same way that like tech software as a service kind of went through this evolution and it had multiple kind of recessions. You had 2000, obviously the bubble bursting 99, and then you had 2001, and at the end of the day, like software as a service was such a great value proposition to anyone that wanted to upgrade and use these
Mhm.
services that didn't have to spend so much capex. And you just like went from capex to opex. And lo and behold, you had this huge explosion of value created from companies like Salesforce.
Mm.
Yeah, the macro
Yeah.
backdrop is important because people, but you know what I mean? Like, I think like this is very much a secular trend. And I think we're going to look back over the next 10 years and say this was a blip. It was a macro headwinds. There's a lot of bullshit in the industry too that needed to be cleansed, but it was a good kind of reset in many ways, and was um, it was just a blip in the radar in terms of the amount of value that's going to be created here.
Yeah, I agree that the changes in the DeFi space are frankly less concerning to me in terms of Web3 gaming. I know from a token price standpoint, we still see major correlation between all of the gaming tokens and projects, but that's only because there aren't products out yet. But as soon as that begins to shift, I expect that we're going to see these two asset classes begin to decorrelate. And I really loved your point about the infrastructure. This is what I've been telling people from day one: is yes, we need to be supporting the founders that are building the game platforms and the game developers, but we also need to be focusing on all of these not quite as sexy infrastructure projects that you got to have the right wallets, you got to have the right L2s, you got to have the
Mhm.
right education and entertainment about the space. You got to have the security and the audits and the platforms that are bringing together guilds and all that. So all of that ecosystem took frankly 2-3 decades to build out in Web 2, and we're doing it in the span of 2 or 3 years in my opinion in Web 3. It's not going to be as fully fleshed out, of course, as you see in the Web 2 gaming industry, but we know a lot of the pieces that need to be ramped up, and I think you see that across a number of different projects today.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I also want to maybe come back to your point about the Ethereum governance decisions, because
Mhm.
that is super interesting to me. And as you said, it's kind of a watershed moment in the Web3 space where we saw very very distributed community globally. Literally, hundreds of thousands of people that are involved in the decision and the activities to move us from proof of work to proof of stake. I think that there's a couple reasons that this is working, but I want to get your take on it. What do you think makes this sort of a governance structure possible? Where, as you said, it's much more difficult to scale governance at high numbers in the real world, in Web 2, if you will.
Yeah, I think, well, that's a very broad question, I guess, but I think, yeah, as you said, like reaching consensus is increasingly harder as you scale out, right? It's like factorial, right? As the number of nodes in the system then just expands in a way where it just becomes really a very hard proposition to reach consensus. And so you have different systems that, like representative democracy, for instance, where you elect an individual that is supposed to represent the views of a large portion of the population, people in the system. Um, I think, obviously there was this kind of minor fork that happened when Ethereum upgraded, and it was in large part like just kind of went away. It was a nothing burger, I think. But there was some dissent nonetheless. But I think it's like from in Ethereum's case, it was a very slow, methodical process of constant like testing and showing it. And when you're building in the open and you're showing to people what the progress that is being made, then I think it gives you increasing confidence, right? There were so many different kind of validators testing the system and making sure that it was, battle tested enough to give confidence to everyone. Um, and I think it's that idea of transparency and accountability that allows people to just give greater confidence. Now, in contrast, there's not a lot of transparency, perhaps, in other systems, political systems, companies, of how decision making happens. And there were some like dev teams, Prismatic Labs, for instance, the Ethereum Foundation, and others that were kind of core contributors to
Mhm.
upgrading and all the different pieces. You also had certainly like a strong voice that Vitalik still has in the community of putting forth proposals and a roadmap, and the beacon chain and all the different sequence of events. Um and so all this to say is, I think where I see a lot of issues in governance is this assumption that you have that you go to like this radical flat higher, like no hierarchy, flat
Mhm.
organizational structure, and assume that that's going to be a viable way to like get things done.
Hmm.
And you've seen that in some DAOs, and it's really hard. I know you have some experience in this, like hiring stuff and whatnot. And so ultimately, you need to have when you compare like governance that happens in what I think is successful governance in Web3 versus like other governance systems. I think the key distinction is this transparency of how decision making happens. You're still dealing with a lot of the same issues. Voter apathy and turnout is always a challenge. And you look at across like DAO proposals, and and discussions like people lose interest, and it's perhaps Maker is a good example of that. It's a fairly complicated system, and then you have this voting structure that is economic and it makes sense based on token holders, but sometimes like token holders are not very informed or keeping up to date, and so um from my standpoint, I think the nice thing about these transparent organizations um, is that you can push certain decision making to the nodes, like to the edge, where people are close. These are the people that are closer to the information and processing that in real time. These are people that are like active delegates in the maker community, for instance, as an example, that they're constantly there, or people in the Illuvium Council that have been um, voted in because they're very deep into the community. This is like Vetamore and and others that have been very much like organically surfaced because they've been very actively part of the project. Um, and you have a mix, right? And so I think it's that ability to because everything is kind of being built very transparently, and the community plays a bigger role, I think, in Web3 systems than in others. Then I think you having the possibility of promoting these individuals and being discovered because everything is in an open form is one of the kind of the core properties of all this of governance and Web3 and these DAOs. And I've observed it in a number of cases, and perhaps most like importantly in the Illuvium Council that I've been a part of in a number of epochs. But seeing the kind of people that have come in has been very refreshing, and I think, yeah.
Yeah. So I think exactly the point you hit on is a carryover from what we see in organizational theory. So when you think about how people get influence in organizations, there's generally like three accepted types of ways that happens. You've got role influence based on someone's in a certain position and therefore they're speaking as the head of marketing for a project or the head of tech. You've got relational influence or because someone has good connections with people within the ecosystem, they're able to carry additional weight when they speak. And then you've got expertise, so those individuals that have demonstrated knowledge in a particular area that's helpful with the community. And I think you mentioning kind of the flattening of the organization structures in Web3 means that by and large, we've taken some of this role power and we've distributed it among the relational and the expertise sides of the fence, if you will, so that all of a
Mhm.
sudden have exactly like you said, a community integrator who's someone, a content creator or someone that's in the Discord every day working with people that's building those relationships out. And then the other side that's a little bit harder to ascertain in Web3 is that expertise, right? People that have meaningful knowledge that should be able to contribute in different ways. And depending on the project, I think it can be easier or harder to identify that. But that's the part that I think really makes me excited because in academic literature, that role influence is actually the least powerful of all three. You're much better off having relational and expertise influence in an organization. Anyone that's been a manager can also tell you that
Mhm.
after their first couple of months, when
Yeah.
they find out that just because they're the boss, people don't just do what they say. It doesn't work that way in real life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's sort of the
so you
distinction between like power and force.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I want to jump into a little bit of your experiences in the
Mhm.
Illuvium Council. I know this is an interesting topic timing wise because as of just a few hours ago, the current voting for Epoch 7 has launched. So you shared, I think, with me and with the community that you're not going to be running for the next cycle. Any
Mhm.
specific reasons why you're made the decision to kind of step down after this epoch for the time being?
I think in this case, there's twofold. One, I've been the longest standing member of the council. Um, and I think I want to allow other people in the community to step up and have more diversity. It's not to say that I won't come back. I may, likely. But I think in this case, is also part of having discussions with folks like you that I know you're running now, and I think I want to see that. I want to see more diversity in the council. Of course, I'll still be involved because I'm still very close to Kieran, and and so for me, it was I'm very mindful that perhaps I've been kind of the council member that has been kind of more removed from Discord and like the daily kind of interactions of that. And so I think as I look, there's a number of other projects that I'm working and building. As you know, I have a podcast, a number of other things, and so I want to be mindful and respectful of like the time requirements that the council entails. And so I think I can accomplish exactly what I've been doing as a early stage investor in the project, and continue to support the team. But in a capacity as like in an informal way. And so, um, I'm not going anywhere. It's just I'm not going to be a council member, if you will. In terms of like Illuvium, I think it's coming up in a very exciting. Uh, as I look to some of the more exciting things, Illuvium has a first mover advantage in many ways. And look, none of this is this is just my opinion, but I do think that the opportunity is for Illuvium to continue to really press on this first mover advantage. And Overworld is looking great, and I think if they continue to execute on that, beta gets released and more people start playing, then I think the game shows for itself. It's a fun game to play, and I think a lot of things need to happen between where it is today and you know where we ultimately want it to be. But
Mhm.
I think it's very exciting to see that, and so yeah, it's a very important time for the project. And of course, some people may be wondering, well, why would you step away from as a council member? But I think I could be of most value to the project by just having direct um, a relationship with the team and helping them out on some things, and be a sounding board, what have you, while also allowing the council to kind of continue to operate. And a lot of the discussions that have happened um the last epoch and two have been very kind of specific, and I felt that sometimes I haven't been the most like equipped on the day-to-day specific stuff to like have a true kind of opinion and very informed opinion on certain things. And so really for me it was just a reflection of what are my core competencies and where can I be of most help to the team. And that
Mm.
led me to the decision to say I want to have as much time. If Kieran wants my help, if the rest of the team wants my help, they can call me and we can discuss things. And I think that's where I can be of most service to the project.
Mm. No, for sure, that makes sense. So as you look back, I think it's been what, 6 epochs that you've been on the council.
Mhm.
What has been one of the most rewarding parts that maybe you didn't expect going in? I mean, I'm sure you had some, some ideas early on. What surprised you?
That's a good question. I think I said it before, but the composition of the council, the diversity of opinions, um, the kind of healthy disagreement, and I think has been very powerful to see. Sometimes you have groupthink, right? Someone steps in and you know either say, council member A says something, and everyone kind of just nods and says, "Yeah, I guess."
Mhm.
But it's been like the quality of the discussion, and also the willingness to not rush to conclusions has been, I think, one of the more rewarding things, because it is very tough, right? When the community expects something, you kind of like set this, it's a very difficult relationship sometimes with the community because they expect something, they want and delaying is you know is kind of a very difficult decision because you're going to have blowback. People are going to criticize that. And so I remember when we were doing like there's a particular discussion about like should we wait or should we launch now the sale for like certain NFTs um and I asked Kieran like is the team ready? Like talk to your engineers. Is it ready? And he said no, we need like another couple weeks. And I said let's wait. And I think that was one of the best kind of discussions that we had because
Mm,
I I really I really think it's better to delay and just do things right. You're never going to be perfect, right? Nothing ever is.
mhm,
But I think sometimes that like, hey, we can probably delay this and it's probably better and not rushing into it. And I think that very important and it's a difficult decision because it was like some of the community members didn't like that.
mhm,
And you have to just be at peace with that decision. And I think that type of kind of ethos, I think has been very much rewarding to see in the council, not just in that instance, but in other decisions as well. And I hope that that continues to be the case
mhm,
because I, you can look. I mean, obviously, it's in hindsight, it's kind of obvious, but a lot of times you think that you need to do something and you're pressured into doing it, and then you look back and you said like it wasn't really worth it.
mm,
And most of the times you can delay decision making, and there are very few things that I think you should save your energy for doing critical upgrades. Um, whereas most of the other things you can be slow. And I think it's difficult because a lot of these epochs, I mean, it was happening in like a red hot raging bull market. And
mhm,
the nice thing about bear markets is people slow down a bit and you have more of the luxury to take more time. But irrespective of whether in a bull or bear, the community is always there and expects accountability for sure. But I think sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
and I think that's a great concept to apply. One of my favorite quotes in the gaming sectors was Miyamoto. I think that a delayed game is eventually good, but a rush game is going to be forever bad. Right? You don't
Exactly.
get a second chance to make a first impression when it comes to a game. And I know,
Mhm.
to your point, a lot of these discussions thus far haven't been like the full game launch. Obviously, we're still building,
Right.
but to a large degree you're introducing your platform, your product, your NFT to the world stage, and you can't take it back. There's no do overs, and so making sure
Yeah.
that you gave it the appropriate time to be fully fleshed out is critical. And I think that's the hallmark of a more mature organization. And we see the opposite happen every day in Web3, right? We see these teams that they throw something out there. Let's get this NFT collection out.
Mhm.
We got a mint date. We've got to hit and just make it happen. And a lot of
Mhm.
times, there may be a lot more there if you allowed it to wait. Yes, people are going to be more impatient, but in the long run, it's going to have more sustainability because you build it on a solid foundation.
Absolutely.
So when you think about the governance structures for Illuvium, I know we've talked a bit about governance V2. It's not fully out yet,
Mhm.
but as you look back at the current version of governance, what do you see as the biggest challenge or issues with it today? What are maybe one of your biggest regrets that you've seen that you think we need to be addressing moving forward?
Well, first of all, I think it's worked fairly well relative to other organizations that I've seen and been a part of. I think even V1. I think it's not perfect, but nothing ever is. And but I think in a relative basis, like and even just objectively seeing like output, right? I think the decisions that have been made, I think have been supportive and in large part like net positive for the project. Um, I think there was an interesting transition. um, and like, not to say that but I did propose this IAP because it felt like there was some tension along the way where I think this was like two epochs ago, where it just felt like the council was just a distraction to the team. And look, it's like you need to have checks and balances, and the council should always prioritize that the voice of the community is heard. But I also felt that it was just a little bit too much of noise. And the risk is sometimes when you empower certain people, you kind of never know how they're going to behave, and sometimes people place their interest ahead of the project, and it felt a little bit like that. And so, this is where I kind of was like, okay, what's really the purpose of all this? And Illuvium is really in an early stage project. The council needs to be there to support and be a sounding board and make sure that the team, in the decisions that are relevant, not all decisions should lean on the council. And it felt like the council was sort of like having the opinion that it should be a part of all decisions. I said, guys,
Mm,
this is not going to work,
mm,
because if you want to be a product manager, go work at Illuvium. That's not like, don't be a
mm,
product manager from the council or from Discord. You know what I mean? Like, they're open.
mhm,
If you really want to be a part of that and you have a core competency, just apply for the job. And so I think I'm happy that we were able to really crystallize the role of the council, less bureaucratic and
mm,
more focused on, let's support first and foremost the team, because it is a very competitive space, and we want to just be there to empower the team and certainly not be a distraction.
mhm,
But striking that balance is sometimes tough, in a vacuum, like, theoretically, yes, but there's still times where I feel like where I've been wrong, where I feel like we're spending too much time on things that are just taking away energy. But then I look back and I say, no, that's actually really important to discuss, and bring
mhm,
to light concerns of the community. Um, and so, this is not to say that I don't think that, like, I sometimes, I kind of like struggle with this internally. I do believe that, like, the power of the community is real. Like, it is, the best projects have really strong communities, but also sometimes it's difficult because communities can have this very vocal minority that doesn't represent the view of the entire community. And this is something that you observe not just in crypto, but just political systems and others. And so I guess that as we think, as we look towards how can we improve governance, generally is one, making sure that, like, we understand and kind of have a way to prioritize proposals and objectives and kind of wishes, desires that the community wants to see with what the team wants to get done. And I think sometimes the discoverability of competent members within the community is always going to be a challenge, and it's always going to be an opportunity to improve, because sometimes there's a lot that goes on in these Discord channels, but having a way to kind of prioritize that and make sure that people feel motivated and also empowered, that their ideas are going to be heard. I'm very much a believer that if you have open forums, good ideas get discovered faster in Web3 than any
mhm.
other system. You know, if you work at, JP Morgan, you're an analyst, and good luck trying to, like,
Yeah.
make proposals to Jamie Dimon of how he should, like,
Mhm.
improve the operations of ATMs and retail branch. Like, it's not going to happen. Right.
Yeah, there's six
But
six layers of removal before he's gonna
yeah,
hear
yeah.
any of those ideas, yeah.
But yeah, I think, like, there's a great book like the Checklist Manifesto and others that, like, talk about, like, I think if we have really good protocols for how people can propose something, document why it's important, then I think we'll stand a very good chance of being the best community and governance out there. Because sometimes everyone likes to ramble, myself included in this podcast, but it's sometimes good to write stuff out and validate
Mhm,
it and have backup for it. And that, I think, is should always be the de facto way of doing it. Amazon did this successfully. Less slides, just write it out. Write a memo, not an IEP, just. And I think that's we should condition the community to kind of think this way.
mhm,
Um, um, and the second one is probably extending the epoch time. I think sometimes there's been discussion around that. Um, I don't think it will detract from the accountability, but I think sometimes it's been perhaps a bit short, um, and too much turnover. And so some we could probably experiment with longer epoch times and always having the possibility to, remove a council member, the same way that you have like the UK Parliament can just dissolve it and remove
Hmm.
the prime minister if he's totally incompetent, as we saw earlier this year. That should always be a possibility. Um, but yeah, the third one that I've been as I ramble here, I think about is maybe should we have more like, so the council is what, five, right? Um, the size of the council could be increased, perhaps, if we introduce certain roles.
Hmm.
Um, and no, that might be too specific now, but just a thought, right? Does it have to be five? Can it be seven? And if it's seven or nine, um, or 11 or whatever, do you grow it out and do you have, maybe we can experiment one epoch with increasing the size. Um, um, but for, but yeah, those are kind of the three things that come to mind.
Hmm. Yeah, I think those are definitely good points. And in the governance V2 structure, that's still, I know the community is probably getting sick of hearing people say, yeah, it's in development. We're trying to get a finalized IIP together for it. But we really are trying to address a lot of those key points, especially I would say the specialization of the roles to exactly like you said. We heard the same thing from Vulcan, I think, a couple terms ago. Like he said, I don't have anything to contribute on the tokenomic side, but as soon as we get to gameplay, like I'm all in. I want to come back
Mhm,
to the table, but I can't bring anything right now. And I think that's the key. If I had to sum up what I see as the biggest risk is that we're focused, laser focused on IOV token holders for the economic growth of the project, and that's absolutely
yeah.
critical. I also think, though, as soon as the game comes out, we have to strike that right balance. And you've got to align the stakeholders with the structure of the council. And so we've seen countless times in other Web2 projects where once you get the CFO promoted to the CEO position, all of a sudden the overall product begins to tank. The community and customers lose faith in the organization. In the same way, we've got to shift from being primarily financially focused to, okay, now we've got a product, we've got to listen to our customers, we've got to have gameplay focus that's in mind, we've got to have a
Mhm,
focus on the community and the marketing and the guilds and content creation, because all of those are bringing in new players, which all of that of
mhm,
course feeds the revenue structure, but you
mhm.
have to keep that balance between them. So I do think having some more specialization of roles and even specialization of voting that's not just IOV token holders once we get these other stakeholders more involved in the project when the games come out.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. Like constituents
Yeah.
outside the Ethereum, outside like the Illuvium core community, but having maybe, someone from YGG or,
Hmm.
what have you, a good partner, immutable or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, I think this next epoch will be critical in making sure that we can get the community sentiment on those topics and create a lasting
Mhm,
structure that brings us into the next, say the next couple of years at a minimum, when we've got games out, we've got community members to think about in different ways than just, is the ILV token going to be value added, right? That's important, but that's not the entirety of
mhm,
the ecosystem soon.
mhm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, in terms of Illuvium, let's talk a little bit about what you see coming up for the project. And we've talked more generally governance and the council. As you look at the next 6 to 9 months, what would you say would be your main focus if you were to encourage this upcoming council coming in? What would you
Mhm.
challenge them to think about first and foremost?
I think, if this time next year, I hope that we will, Overworld is a huge success. Increasingly, a lot of people are playing it and are liking it. And um, I think that is perhaps the number one priority, right? And make sure that people continue to be engaged. We gather feedback from users as we do this kind of rollout of the beta. And I think that's the most important thing at this stage of this project. And it's really proven to people we can build a great game that is fun, engaging. And if that holds true, then everything else kind of sorts itself out. And
Mm.
so, as the council, I think the priority and the thing that you always going to be, asking yourself is, is what I'm doing now, are the proposals that are being put forth now are going to get us closer to that state. I don't want to call it an end state, but let's call it an interim, like very
Mhm.
important state. And if that's the case, great. If it's not, then drop it and focus on the more important things. And I think you have to be, I think the best builders in the space are just ruthlessly kind of just focused on that. And and the problem and the challenge I see sometimes is that it can be very distracting to kind of try to do a lot of other things. But I'm confident that the team, and it starts with Kieran, but doesn't end there, is that they're very much focused on this. And I think the council should always be focused on that as well. And of course, like if if there is deviations, like be vocal. Don't be afraid to introduce stuff that might seem insignificant or what have you. But if people are sufficiently large number of people are talking about it and it's diverse, then it's worth discussing.
Mhm.
But I'm just saying, like, I think you have to be kind of ruthlessly focused on what is the most important thing. And just make sure that you're not a distraction. So what I like to tell teams when I invest is, look, I'll help you out. I'll be here if you need me. But sometimes you think that you can help, but you're only just getting in the way, and you never want to be in the way.
Mhm.
um, and so, like, I always ask myself this question: is what I'm doing today the thing that is, you know, the most important thing? And if it's not, I drop it and I put it. I'll shelf it. I'll come back to it later. Um, and for me, that was in large part the decision to not run for council this time, because I said, look, I'm finding myself with increasingly less time, and where I can help the team the most is just by being close with Kieran. If he needs me, he can always call me. I'll respond within 5 minutes, and as long as that's okay, then I whatever requests he has on and he DMs me, I'll be there and I'll
Mhm.
try to be as most helpful. Um, and I just know that there are other people that are going to be much, much more engaged on the day to day and have the ability to spend more time in the council. And it's not an easy decision. I'd love to continue to be in the council, but it's also, you know, I'm mindful of the responsibilities and the roles and the time commitment. And as I find myself like not being able to do that, what's the alternative? I can run for council and kind of try to whiff it and try to juggle a lot of things that I'm trying to do at once. Or I can just like be purely focused on if and when Kieran and Aaron and the rest of the team needs me, I'll be there.
Mhm.
And I'll be able to help the most. And so yeah, I think just like we need to stay increasingly focused. I think the team has shipped and delivered a ton this year. Um, and it's important to like look back and appreciate how far we've come and the team has executed. There have been delays for sure, but tell me a project that has done what Illuvium has done in it's in its short existence.
Mhm.
And so and the resources that and the resource that it has. And I think it's been very efficient while also not compromising on what I think is quality. And so I
Mhm.
think that is like we look back and I think it's we can always you um give team that credit. And so, yeah, I think we should just continue to empower them in ways that we can as a council and just community members.
Hmm. That's great feedback. Your point about being ruthlessly focused on the most important thing is absolutely, I think, the right take. And we had a lot of discussions over the last few weeks on that. I got that question a lot, like what have I been focusing on with Illuvium? What do I think is most important? And that's why I'm spending so much time talking about governance V2. And it feels like often I'm kind of beating a drum that eventually people get tired of. But what I see is if we don't make those adjustments, as soon as the game comes out and we see all of the betas out, Illuvium Zero comes out with the land game, and we see the overworld out, all of a sudden people are going to say, oh my God, we need to start getting better feedback, and we need to be taking gameplay topics into account a lot more, right? We don't have any IPs about gameplay. We've got the spider IP. No offense to that one, but like we want to add a spider alluvial. That's okay. But like all of a sudden you're going to have balance changes and expansion topics and economic integration points. All of those are going to need their own attention while the topics that we've been focused on over the past few years are still popping up. And for me, the most important thing from a community perspective that I think we can do is make sure that structure is in place now, so that when the game comes out, we don't have to all of a sudden spend 3 months in the middle of this while we're getting the feedback and the beta testing is going on to get that foundation in place. So that's why, from my perspective, I've been so laser focused on this particular point over the past 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah. So I want to actually borrow with pride, or copy with pride, if you will, from you, one of the elements that I think you guys have done on Empire. I've got a few lightning round
Oh,
questions that I want to throw at you. So for audience,
okay.
I didn't send any of this over ahead of time.
Oh,
So this can be a hot take if you want, but I'm
mhm.
going to say in 15, 30 seconds or less,
Okay.
give me your take on each of these. So I've got four for you. So you ready for number one?
You shoot. Yep.
Let's do
As
it.
ready as I can be, I guess.
Okay. All right. So lightning round question number one. DAOs are the first truly useful invention in history spawned from regulation.
Uh, no, I disagree with that. I think there's been a lot of other useful innovations that have spawned out of regulation.
Okay.
Plus, I think that well, yeah, I guess, yeah, cut.
Okay. Fair. All right. Question two. General consumer sentiment around Web3 gaming will turn to be more positive than negative by the end of 2023.
Yes, in large part, again, Illuvium other games launching and really blowing people's minds away.
Okay. Next, the best way to structure a Web3 gaming project is through a DAO.
Yes, partially, but make sure that the team has full ownership on product.
Hmm. Okay. And then lastly, governance V2 will create a sustainable structure for Illuvium for at least the next 2 years.
Unlikely. The space moves so fast. It's already sustainable, you could argue. Um, it's maybe a Pareto. It will get us 80, 90%
Mhm.
there, but we should always be flexible in adapting because here's the point. The community today, think about how the community is going to be in 2 years. And there's different scenarios, but all you can do now is build a great product. But you sure as hell know that if we onboard millions of users, it's going to be very different. And I think for that reason and that reason alone, you argue that perhaps we're going to have to, the core properties, principles, structure largely the same, but you're going to have to be a little bit perhaps, one, you should always be flexible. Rigidity kills you in crypto and pretty much everywhere. So we should never be really, I've gone way overboard, but yeah, flexibility is a key property, malleability, and always be open to adapting to current
Mm.
circumstances
Yeah.
without like
Yeah.
necessarily compromising core values, principles, and ethos.
Mm. No, that's fair. And I allotted you the extra time. That was the last question. So we'll consider the lightning round already
Yeah, no,
over.
I
This is
cheated.
that's just us chatting.
You can
It's
always
okay.
cheat on one question in the lightning round.
Yeah, exactly. See, the rules having made it up. Um,
Yeah.
Good. So I love that take too. I know we've talked about the projects that are able to iterate the fastest on good ideas are the ones that are going to be successful here because the space is
Mhm.
so early. We
Mhm.
talked a little bit about the general market sentiment today. Certainly, I'll just reiterate our normal points that nothing that we're saying here is financial advice for any of the projects.
Mhm.
We're here, as we've talked about, to make sure that we've got good products that are launching, good games, good infrastructure platforms, that we're building the community and the decentralization that we think the world needs. Any final thoughts on your end that you'd like to leave with our audience before we wrap up?
Um, no, I mean, I think this is all true, and I think that's a great discussion. The last thing I'll say is, I think the morale is continues to be quite high, just by looking at, especially in Illuvium. I sense it. And that's super important. I think it's been a difficult last couple of months for a lot. But if you're listening from the U.S., my favorite holiday, even though I'm not American, is although I live there, is Thanksgiving, and I think it's incredible. It's time to just reflect on everything that's happened and be thankful for a lot of things. And I think it's I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. And sometimes I question, should I go elsewhere? Should I do something? But then I say, I stay close to the founders and the teams, and I think it's incredibly refreshing to see a lot of them just not pay too much attention as crypto Twitter does on a lot of events. And I think everything that's happened recently is a good reminder um, of why we're doing this and why it matters. And I think builders are going to build no matter what market environment they're in, and I think the best teams just stay focused, stay in their lane, and I'm fortunate to be close to a lot of them by virtue of investing them, just helping them out. And so I think, yeah, I would encourage everyone. I think sometimes it's good to take some time off, reflect, but also be thankful. And I certainly have a lot to be thankful for, including a lot of people in the Illuvium community voting me as a council member time and time again. So I really appreciate that, a vote of confidence, and I'm really excited what's to come in the next epochs. And I know you're running, so best of luck. And yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Mhm. Very much appreciate it, Santi. So thank you again, and we wish all of our listeners a great Thanksgiving, whether you're in the U.S. and celebrating it or not. As Santi said, it's definitely a good time to reflect. And if you have not voted and you are an ILV holder by the time this comes out, please go vote. Right, there's a lot of great candidates out there, myself, but also many others that been able to interact with over the past few years.
Mhm.
Great opportunity. And also remember, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain afterwards. So we'll be taking
There we
notes.
go.